any moment this is going to break bad. This is not going to go well.
Hello and welcome to Did I Do That? Season 5, Guys, Burgers, and Fries. It's a podcast about graphic designers and the silly little bacon burgers we make on the way to making something powerful and majestic like Five Guys style Cajun fries. Because it's all part of the process, I'm Sean Schumacher, and joining me today, a very special guest. He's a designer, illustrator, and writer whose words have graced the likes of McSweeney's, It's Nice That, and The Believer. He previously wrote dictionary stories, short fictions, and other writings, and his latest book, And Introducing, is available as an absolutely beautiful limited edition on his website. And these days, he designs iconography for Instagram at Meta, most notably in the form of the icon for Threads all the way from the UK. It's Jez Burrows.
Hi! Wow, that's overwhelming. Also, never been to Five Guys. Just want to get that out on the table. I could leave now.
Well, it would be disappointing. This is a little experiment that I'm doing. The Five Guys stuff, because money's been a little tight around Did I Do That Enterprises as of late.
It's falling apart.
Yeah. This space is literally falling apart.
For the listener, we're recording in a barrel that is presently on fire.
Well, it's on fire and it's going over Niagara Falls. So if we just start screaming at some point, that's the reason. But yeah, it's summer. I, as a teacher, people often say to teachers, like, wouldn't it be nice to just have 3 months off? And I would counter that with, I don't get paid in those 3 months. So does that sound like fun vacation time to you? I submit that it is not. Plus I've been doing a lot of big events. Like I just came from Seattle, your former home, Jez. Mm-hmm. Big events mean big expenses. So this Five Guys stuff, it's a little bit of an experiment on my part in terms of voluntary embedded marketing.
Have Five Guys reached out yet? Or
no? The answer is no.
Oh, okay.
Five Guys has not reached out, but it is season 5, and there's a limited number of companies with the word 5 in their name. I would say I can think of Channel 5 in the UK. I don't think they're gonna sponsor me.
Seems doubtful.
Seems unlikely that they know I exist. I've also never watched it, so that's probably an issue also. Although
I wouldn't lead with that.
No.
If you're trying to court them, maybe that's,
Yeah. I also, to go back to your point of you've never been to Five Guys, I've also never eaten at Five Guys.
Oh.
I can't. There's nothing they make that I can eat.
Okay, I see.
So it's maybe not an ideal brand match, I will say.
No, some might say is completely inexplicable.
Yeah, kind of like the worst possible arrangement. But I think that's not necessarily a problem because, I don't know, do the people who host podcasts who get Aura Frames or Squarespace or what have you, are they using those products? It seems like maybe they are.
They tell me that they are.
They tell me that they are as well.
They tell me that they need vitamins.
Uh-huh.
They love mattresses.
This is the most comfortable mattress that they've ever slept on in their life.
Truly, yeah. And those vitamins, really making a difference.
Yes.
And
something. We were talking earlier about, the incredible vitamins that were given to the rats that used to be in this studio, the rat's nest, and how strong and powerful they became from those vitamins.
Right. I mean, the one that welcomed me at the door seemed very pleasant and stacked.
Well,
he's a swole guy.
They're in charge around here.
Yeah.
I'm just their tenant, so I'm not
I mean, he has a gun to your temple. Which explains the sort of tone, I think.
Intimidation is sort of the vibe that I want to imbue the guests with. And these rats are, I don't want to say they're out for blood, but they're hungry for it.
They're curious about it. They're open to it.
They've seen us and all the delicious foods we eat, such as the incredible burgers and hot dogs and fries.
You're
at
told.
Five Guys.
You're told.
Burgers and fries. Maybe that is something that they are watching us eat and going I don't necessarily want to eat the food, but I see the cows eat the grass, and I don't necessarily want to eat the grass, but I want to eat the cow. So it could just be a matter of time until they start, eating us. And they are getting bigger and stronger than us, so it could be soon. But if there's one thing I've learned from the Planet of the Apes movies, that seems to work just fine. And then they have just their own society and it's good.
Unrelated.
You don't want to follow up on that one?
No. I was just unrelatedly. Do you ever feel like you're hallucinating?
Oftentimes.
Powerfully.
Yeah. I think we've talked multiple times on this show about the gas leak that seems to be in this space.
Well, I mentioned to you earlier, I flew into Portland last night. So
Yes.
there's also there's going to be a tone to this that is heavily inspired in collaboration with jet lag.
Yeah, and
So-
how are your arms feeling also?
Nice.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. We found the level.
Yeah,
I
but
like it.
you've been like, you used to live in Seattle. You were out in Seattle for a number of years, and you have just recently moved to London.
Yes.
How has that transition been?
It's been good. I mean, it's been a wild time. I was in Seattle for 4 years. I moved there a week before COVID, which
Ideal timing.
just a cool time to meet people, to make friends, to go outside.
Go to lots of indoor raves and
Love that. Just like to lick things.
Coughing parties.
Yeah, love that stuff. So I did a lot of that, and weirdly, it didn't catch on. So I left Seattle, and so I've been in London since the beginning of April, and it's really good. It feels odd to go back to. Well, I've never lived there before, but I've always lived vicariously through my friends who have lived there. So it's nice to go back to a place that doesn't feel like a complete new start, because I can already embed with a couple of people and places. But
Yes.
it is still very much a largely brand new start. So it's still quite early. I don't know. It's going well. It's a fun place. London. It's a fun place.
I mean, it seems like there's a lot going on there.
Yeah,
it
they've
would
got
be hard
stuff.
for it to not to be a fun place.
Yeah, they've got things. There's occasional events.
They've got things. They've got trains. They've got.
Boy, if you like trains, you're gonna love London because you can't move for the things.
Well,
They're just.
I mean, sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I thought. Well, I lived 12 years in a country whose attitude to train travel is.
Sure, we've got trains.
Just that sounds.
Just don't look at them
Yeah.
or use them.
That's unfair. I did take the Amtrak like on the West Coast a few times, and that is not without its charms.
Yes.
But more trains is good.
More trains is good,
Would
and
have loved more trains.
it sure would be nice if there were multiple train tracks, say going north and south on the West Coast, so that say if there's a train accident or something, you're not stuck on a train for 4 extra hours. As maybe I was. I don't know. Anyway. I still like Amtrak a lot too, and they're doing good.
Despite it all, they're doing
Despite
good.
it all.
Yeah.
But Jez, I don't think you came here to talk about trains necessarily.
Well,
You
didn't
came here
I?
to talk about Five Guys Burgers and Fries.
Exactly.
A
Let's get back
restaurant
on track.
neither of us have been to. And I really only know about from my days doing Uber Eats over the summer. They have the worst looking restaurants and the highest priced burgers. So that money's got to be stashed somewhere.
That tagline really isn't doing them any favors.
No,
too.
they should stop calling it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have they identified who the titular Five Guys are, by the way? Or is it...
That's a good question. Well, I think there's Dopey, there's Happy, there's Sleepy.
There's George Clooney.
There's George Clooney because he's got to get in there.
He's got a finger in every pie.
I think the fifth one is Deadpool. He's also got to have a finger in every single pie as well.
Well, this is brand synergy. This is
Yeah.
what we're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
So please, all 5 of the guys, I know you must agree in your quorum when you're wearing your hooded vests and sitting at your very tall table. Please sponsor me.
These are 5 men who have nothing to do with food service. It's beginning to make a lot of sense why Five Guys is maybe not the right one.
But still, I'll take the wrong one even.
Okay.
Yeah. But yet you come from the UK, but not London.
Yes.
Where actually were you from originally?
Some from the southwest of England, a county called Devon.
Oh, cool.
Lived in East Devon.
I have a friend named Devon.
Oh.
Probably unrelated.
Probably.
Yeah,
But
I would
never
have
say
to
never.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we get him on the phone just to check? No.
No.
All right. Okay. Well, my Devon, it was a very, a super rural upbringing. It's a lovely place. I grew up on a farm, had very few neighbors nearby. And it was a beautiful place. And then moved to study in Brighton on the south coast, kind of like an hour south of London.
Like, I think we were talking before the recording, you were saying, like, in your foundations year at Brighton, like this kind of introductory year, that was kind of where you discovered design a little bit, right?
Yeah. So the foundation year was actually I did in Exeter, which was like the largest town to me down in the southwest. And yeah, that was the first time. It feels crazy to admit that, but it was the first time that I'd really sort of put together that all of these disparate things that I knew I enjoyed doing and was like beginning to be somewhat capable at could all be pulled together into something called graphic design. And it was a career, apparently. That foundation year, I think we did kind of rotations through sculpture, photography, and graphic design, and then I picked graphic design.
Wow.
And
so they really gave you like kind of a robust variety of things to explore.
Yeah. You were kind of spoiled for choice, honestly. I wish I could have. I loved just taking because you would do. I think it was maybe a month or a couple of months that you would do the rotations for.
Yeah.
I wish I could have just done that because it was a good time. Sculpture was not for me. Stabbed myself with a Stanley knife within, I want to say, 30 minutes of the first class.
Yeah, you kind of got to go through that.
Yeah.
That should just be part of the curriculum. It's like you have to have at least 1 or 2 stab wounds before you can even like start your first project.
It was instructive, you know. It was like it was the world saying, "Hey, this is not for you. You should put your energies elsewhere."
Have you heard about these things? Computers, they're a lot safer.
They aren't sharp.
Well,
they won't make
now
you.
They are.
Well, they are pretty sharp. It's harder to make yourself bleed with them. As it was with this particular Stanley knife. I still have the scar.
Really? It's one of those.
It was a gnarly one. So that was my first brush with graphic design, and that's what led me to study it at college, university at Brighton.
Do you remember any of the projects like they had you doing in those days?
In the foundation year?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was one, there was a lot of probably you'll recognize some of these as a teacher, but like there was a lot of that, here is a type exercise. We're going to give you a few lines of something and we want you to set it in like 1,000 different ways.
Oh, sure. Yes.
So there was lots of that, which actually
students love those.
I'm sure.
We do a very simplified version of that where it's like, here's a letter and draw like the letter A 100 different ways. And you can just like you always know when that has been assigned because you will just hear grumbling as you walk down the hallways.
Yeah. But I think it's looking back on it, I can see the rationale for it, and I think it's necessary, and I think it is. There's still value to that as an exercise.
It's so important. It's so important.
Yeah. My biggest memory, like of a project from that period, was I forget what the brief even was, but what it ended up in, what it transpired was a sort of a pamphlet and a sort of an educational campaign for a fictional disease.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you remember what the disease was?
Yes, it was called. Sorry. You know, when you like, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but then when you say it out loud to a person you just met, you start to realize, oh, this is absurd.
Now, what if the person you just met has a giant hot dog on the wall right behind you?
That's true. Okay, yeah, I'm in the
Part
right.
of my Five Guys promotion, of course.
All right, I'm in the right company. It was called Baskerville syndrome, and it was caused by like listening to really discordant jazz.
Oh, sure.
And it was a condition of the inner ear that like listening to jazz like really messed you up, and it sort of affected your balance, and it affected how is this education? I don't there was a list of symptoms, and one of them was affected balance, and the other one was that you couldn't hear what in the UK would be called like tannoy, but like, like broadcast like announcement systems.
Oh, sure. Yeah. PA systems.
There we go. Yeah. And so my friend at the time, I roped her in to like star in like a little like sort of educational movie, like a film about this.
Oh my God.
It was
so elaborate.
It was very elaborate.
I was imagining just like a brochure.
So yeah, there was a brochure, and then there was this short video that was kind of like, a public information film about Baskerville syndrome. And it mostly resulted in my friend sort of like stood at our local train station just kind of looking lost.
So like 90% of the people who are at a train station.
Yeah. What I was about to say what a waste of time. It's I don't know. What's funny is that push to like invent a fake thing and to make it legitimate through design is something that I still enjoy and I'm still sort of interested in and doing today. Not like professionally, but like it's the thing that I really like in the, you know, the sort of evening and weekend times. But like, it's funny that I was doing it even then, but I remember the actual design was very bad. Like it looks like, it looks like a club flyer. It's really fascinating now because I wasn't savvy enough at that point to look at, you know, like a real pamphlet for a real disease.
Sure, yeah.
And sort of ape that and use that. Like I just wanted to make it look cool because I was naive and like graphic design was still kind of new.
Yeah. And that was probably like a visual language that you were more familiar with too.
Like, yeah. And also I think at that point, the idea of, I wanted the design to be showy, but that wasn't the goal. If I was teaching me at that point, that would have been my first criticism. It's like, this isn't convincing.
Yeah.
Not because this is patently a made up disease and you are, there's something going on with you that we don't want to address. But it's not convincing because it doesn't look like an actual piece of the, like, you know, ephemera that you're trying to reference.
Yeah.
But I don't know, you know, it was my first attempt at that stuff. And I think people were just like tickled about the idea of it. But yeah, that's the one that sticks out in my head.
That's so funny. That's so funny. I would also counter. I mean, like, I think we've all seen the public information campaigns where it's like, we're trying to be cool about teaching people not to smoke or something like that. So maybe it's like that. Maybe Baskerville syndrome, the youth are like, they're not connecting with those older materials. So we got to throw some marketing dollars at it. Get Wyden and Kennedy in here. They're going to like...
You're being so generous and I really appreciate that. But you have to understand that this looked like dog shit. Sorry, it's 10 minutes in. I've already cursed. I can pull back on that.
No, it's fine. This is an explicit show.
Yeah, well, it was real dog shit. It was just absolutely. It was so bad. I don't think I have any of that stuff saved. Yeah, I'm still friends with the person who I roped in to start.
Really?
Yeah, she's my oldest friend now, I think, at this point. But the main memory I have of that is that her like character in the video was like, I've written to these train stations to tell them about, like, you know, awareness for Baskerville syndrome because I can't hear when my train is coming. And their response was that the train company wrote back to her on letterheaded paper and it just said, use buses.
So these letters actually got sent? And...
No, this is all nonsense. Like, this is all as
See, I think
it was an excuse to make jokes.
Yes,
basically...
I love that. I think my brain is like, what is the modern brand response to that, which is the asshole response?
Yeah, it's probably it's somebody on social media, like, you know, typing in all lowercase and calling it Brat Summer or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's like
the Wendy's Twitter from 8 years ago or whatever that was.
Yeah. Wow, that is a very inauspicious start.
But like that was like an important like entry point to design, and then it kind of like maybe at least those processes are like percolating still behind the scenes.
Definitely.
And you come back to them. So this is while you're still at Exeter, like what happens when you like start to move over to Brighton and like really get into what design means? Yeah,
I mean it's a story that probably anybody who's studied graphic design will recognize. Like it was a 3-year course. You know, all of the rudiments that you're probably familiar with, like they're all laid out. Like there were those projects that were a little bit more vague and were a little bit more playful, and there were ones that were like really about, you know, let's get the basics down and let's talk about type and let's really talk about type.
Oh yeah.
Brighton, I think very fondly about my time at Brighton for a number of reasons. First of all, I mean, I'm sure everybody, this is a common experience, but just like the people that I met there are still my friends. And it was the first time at being exposed to, you know, here are 60 people who you're going to have way more in common with in general than people that you've, in education terms at least, like have way more in common with and are more on the same wavelength and you have the same references. And it's like, that's huge. That's a huge boon.
Like your first real taste of community.
Yes.
And community around purpose.
100%. Yeah. And from like a sort of like a, I mean, this might be curious to you specifically as a professor, but like there were the 3 years, and there was a separate graphic design course and illustration course. I think these days it's combined into like visual communication. But at that point, it was 2 separate courses, but they shared a studio space.
Oh, interesting.
So you had a massive room with like 30, 40 graphic designers on one side and then 30, 40 illustrators on the other side. And we always had that shared space together. And then as in the second year, we like moved up literally 1 floor in the building, and we all shared the next space, and then 3rd floor, same again.
Wow.
And it was really, I credit that with a lot of how myself and a lot of people who graduated that year turned out, because I think it's so nice to have another discipline just sort of like bubbling away in another corner of the room.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it definitely led to a lot of graphic designers, myself included, who had like, if not, I mean, I think I've said this before, if not like illustrative ability, then illustrative aspirations, because we'd been exposed to all of these amazing illustrators like developing at the same time as us.
Yeah, you're getting to cross-pollinate each other, which is such a rare thing, I feel like.
Yeah.
That's such a cool setup. And the whole idea of like actually moving up in terms of floors.
Yeah.
Are the floors getting nicer as you're going up too? Like you got a spotless bathroom up on 4?
No, I think they were pretty comparable actually. You just got a slightly nicer view on the top floor. I think that's probably it.
Not nothing.
Yeah. And maybe also your access to facilities got better. So that was the other thing. So at Brighton, again, at least at the time, there was a full letterpress studio.
Wow.
With a letterpress technician installed. This guy who had been like he had been like a journeyman letterpress guy and had grown up and had tons of experience and was like I was about to say a font of knowledge, but I'm not going to. I would like to say that I didn't. I said it with big quote marks because God damn it. But he knew everything about letterpress, and he was an amazing resource. And then we also had a bookbinding studio and a screen printing studio. And I don't know, it's very easy to look back on that time with rose tinted glasses, but it really put a fire in my belly in terms of you're learning the basics, but you have exposure to people and processes and potential and all of these new things.
Yeah, the new and the old all mixed together. Mm-hmm. So you're really getting to like enmesh yourself. Do you remember like any projects that you worked on from those days? Yeah,
mostly from getting towards like the later years, but one that was particularly significant for me was, and I forget the brief. I think it was just to take a body of very complex information and to express it in a simplified or like a graphic way, and there were these towards the end there were these very, very vague briefs, so people could just kind of go ham on and do whatever. But at the time, data visualization was very was very big.
Yeah,
and I was like people like Nicholas Felton, I was like following from afar.
Yeah,
and what it ended up with was, do you know the band Destroyer?
I don't think I do.
It's like a Canadian like indie rock band who I really adore, but I did like a data visualization of one of his records. So it was like all of the lyrics broken down into all of these like variously illustrated like ways of sorting lyrics, like vocabulary types, and then also like allusions and references, and it was like, and then it turned into a big 2-color screen print. And I just remember that being really significant because it was my first brush with getting a response for putting a piece of design on the internet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think I forget the real order that it happened, but I made this thing, and I think I had like probably a Tumblr at that time, and I put it there, and then it started getting shared in a bunch of sort of design blogs, and people started emailing asking if it was like a print that they could buy.
Oh, really? Wow.
Which is really exciting to be working in, relative darkness for a long time, and then to suddenly, have a bunch of strangers really engaging with your work I remember being, I don't know, it felt special. Felt nice.
Absolutely. Those early days of Tumblr, it just felt like such magic of like, you could put something out there and you would find a following. Like, I mean, I had a Tumblr that had many more followers than it ought to have had based on the content that I was posting. But like you would get those connections and people who were actually like engaging with stuff. And it was so fascinating.
Yeah. And also the this I don't think really is around today, but like the design blogs of the time, which is funny because I was like quite involved with it. It's nice that, but the other ones prior to that, a little bit before, like Grain Edit and
Form
55 and Kitsune Noir that then became The Fox is Black. Like all of these, I feel like I think I sound 1,000 years old when I say this.
I think just saying the word blog is enough to make kind of Gen Z tune out. But
yeah,
believe it or not, those were very important and popular things, and
they were essential, I would actually say.
Yeah.
And it was a big, just to give context on that period for folks who are like studying now, like I don't know if there's a counterpart now, but if your work got shared on one of those blogs, like and that's why I bring up the Destroyer poster.
Yeah.
Like, you suddenly have like a bunch of people who are aware of your work that you didn't have before. And people also, in a way that I don't know if it's possible with Instagram or I guess Arena or like other places where people are putting work these days, or collecting work. You would have a folder. You would like have an RSS reader or something of like a dozen design blogs, and daily there would just be new people and new stuff, and it was pretty dependable and very focused. And if you got featured on one of these, like it was a huge bump, or could be a huge bump to your career, as I found.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also this thing of like, I think for folks a little older than us, even like it's the print annuals, it's the like those are the milestone. And like as soon as those design blogs came about, like those kind of just went away, and they're just not like, I think Graphis is still published, but I haven't looked at one in 15 years. Like that became the epicenter of the design world so quickly. And because of that, like, it's so much more accessible now. Anyone like you doing that flyer for, for Baskerville syndrome, like you could have been featured on one of those. Like, the skepticism on your face around that.
There is a sliding doors like Gwyneth Paltrow like scenario where like that is the piece of work that, and instead of having a career quote unquote in graphic design, I would probably have just been like thrown into a volcano, like and rightly so, because like that piece of work would not have led to anything.
You would be the brand guru at GlaxoSmithKline or whatever, coming up with their cool new, drug labels. Whoa.
The kids aren't into this one. We need something new. We need,
Allegra, what if it's called Fart Machine? Actually, no, don't call it Fart Machine.
No, I think, that's like to the volcano with you. Like that's where that belongs. But anyway, so that Destroyer poster was a big deal, and also enabled me to. So I made like a short run of it for the degree show, and then like after graduation or sort of around graduation, like I wanted to make a run of it that I could sell and actually get out there, and that was big too at the time, because I was just I was on the tip of graduation, and I was really worried about like. If it was even possible to make a living with what I was coming out with. And this was just like a nice little nudge that like maybe it was possible, and maybe it doesn't. All of my friends at the time were by and large, a lot of the like graphic designers at least, were going to London. They were going to start as a junior designer at probably like a pretty thankless role in an agency or somewhere, and then they would start like working up through that. And I was terrified of that, and I also didn't really want to do it.
No, that sounds terrible.
I don't know. For some people, I'm sure it was great. Like, I had a combination of like little faith in myself, and I don't know. I mean, that's what happens when you graduate into a recession.
Yeah, I think because I was going to say, I think because you were 08,
yes,
right, and I was 09, and like I think I was definitely in a similar boat of like. Where I was graduating in Vegas, like there weren't design jobs that I knew of, and the ones that were out there were for casinos, and I really didn't want to do that. So it's like move to LA and do one of those like agency jobs that, I mean, God knows if I could even get it, and I'd be in a city I don't know anyone.
Yeah.
That sounds bad.
Yeah.
Or like keep going to school and like but to be coming out of school and to actually have like your design getting out there and to be making money from it, selling these prints, like that's got to be huge in terms of like, I know I want to forge my own path and I have like evidence that it works.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, well, a couple of things happened right around graduation that made this a lot easier too. So while I was in Brighton, I lived in like this amazing, like 6-bedroom house, pretty shambolic, but all of us like going to art school, I think.
So this is not a clean house whatsoever. This is truly...
I don't know. We were still designers, so there was a degree of kind of, anal sort of obsessiveness, but like...
The rats had not yet taken over this house.
No. Yeah, it was reasonably clean, but we were still students. So, the couch was one we found like on the street. And could have had rats in it for all I know. Like they were probably like really enjoying being there. But anyway, so I lived in this house and... started a collective with it's about 4 or 5 of us called Evening Tweed.
I love it. Wow, that's talk about a 2009 name.
Yes, absolutely. It's like very stuck in time. And the premise was, so there were 4 or 5 of us, and we were all quite different actually in our styles. Like I was doing some illustration, some branding. One of us was doing like very pen and ink heavy sort of lettering. One of us was doing paper sculpture. One of us was a woodworker. But so it was sort of all over the place. But we were mostly just pulling together under one name because we thought we could share. Say for example, one of us had work featured on one of those blogs that we were just talking about. Then we could kind of share the wealth and sort of direct those people to the rest of us who are also making work and trying to find gigs. So that was really helpful. And the key part was also that we had a website portfolio up. That at a time when some of the people that we were graduating with did, but quite a few did not. And it sounds insane now, like in this day and age, to be like there were people who were graduating and didn't really have like a site.
But I when I graduated, we didn't even have a portfolio class. Like we did not need to make a site. We did not need to make the bound portfolio. I think it was not a required thing in a lot of cases back then.
I was talking to someone recently about this because I was walking around London and I walked sort of near Hampstead Heath, and it reminded me that one of the things that I did when I graduated was I took a literal printed portfolio to Warp Records, because it was Warp, so I was but the idea that they would let me in, the idea that I turned up with a printed portfolio like I was selling vacuums, like it seems from the past, like capital P, like did I like as if I got there on like a paddle like steamship or something. Like I don't. It's insane to think that was.
You've got your portfolio in one hand and then a suitcase full of brushes in the other hand.
Right. But that was. I don't know if I did that to quite a few places. I don't know if it really resulted in any work, but the website did, the portfolio did.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of us did start to get attention, and it's how I ended up. One of my first gigs out of graduation, which I still is crazy to think about, was a recurring editorial illustration gig for the New York Times.
I was going to ask about that, 'cause that's coming out of just graduating and going into that. That's a huge client to get.
That's terrifying, is what that is. That's possibly a prank. That's someone who. Yeah, I just getting an email from an art director there, and so the absolutely surreal. So it was essentially a health column. It was weekly. I think it lasted for at least like a few months, 2 or 3 months maybe. But the turnaround was, was very common for editorial illustration in general. But this was real baptism by fire. Like I had no idea what I was doing, and. It was also hilarious to graduate and be like, oh boy, an editorial spot for the New York Times, the glamour. Oh, what is the column about? Oh, it's IBS? Cool. What's next week's about? Scabies? Neat. These are pretty indicative of the kinds of things that I was being asked to visualize. It was like gestational diabetes.
Wow.
Great. Cool. This is a career. This is what I had in mind.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily when you Google somebody, you don't want the suggested terms to include scabies necessarily.
You'd prefer it not to, ideally. Yeah.
If you can avoid it.
Yeah. That'd be preferable.
But that's still a huge get. This is a recurring
Definitely.
spot illustration job. How did those illustrations turn out? Like, what did you end up doing in this like quick turnaround time?
They were bad. They were, how you say,
on a scale between scabies and IBS, where would you?
Oh, who can choose? You know, who can?
They're all my favorites. You know, they're like my children.
They ran the gamut. No, they were. It was. Okay, first of all,
such a thoughtful look on your face as you're trying to figure out how to describe this.
It's more guilt, I think. So some of these are still available. So before I came today, I had to look up and just see if I could find any. And there are a couple that are still archived on the New York Times website. And it's so interesting to look at them now because I can see in those illustrations there is a part of me that is trying to figure out like what his aesthetic looks like.
Yes.
Which sounds a bit cheap, but also, you know, as an editorial illustrator, like at that point, at least, you know, that's what you're being picked up on. And I can also see in these, I can see the other illustrators that were like making big names at the time. Like it's hard not to see it in the light of people like Always With Honor.
Oh, sure.
Or
yes.
like Frank Schumacher and Scripts and Seal and like all these people who were kind of, I was coming up at the same time as, and you know, it was a period of Twitter that was like, kind of seems very blissful and idyllic now in a way that it absolutely does not now.
What do you mean?
I don't know.
Well, Twitter doesn't exist anymore, so thankfully we don't have to ever think about it.
Yeah,
again.
there we go.
Yeah.
But I can see in those illustrations, like I'm just desperately trying to like find like, is this what I look like? Is this how I can make a career? And I remember just from a purely nerdy, like very, very detailed standpoint, just to give you an idea of how unprepared I was for this. It was a 24-hour turnaround time. They would send you an article, which is not uncommon for an editorial illustration, but for a freshly graduated little child, which I was
you're luxuriating in like 4 or 5 week project turnarounds.
Yeah. So it was the best thing because you had to make peace with where you were currently at.
Yeah.
And I remember in Illustrator, like the style that I was kind of going for was like, it was very like textural and very like rough edged. And I remember that I had like an Illustrator file that was full of like vectorized rough edges that were based on like scanned pencil lines that I had made. And it was the most obscenely time-consuming thing to just apply these to the edges and make it look rougher instead of
these are not even brushes. These are just...
I know.
Oh, God.
What was I doing?
Oh, God.
I used my life minutes on Earth to do that instead of just learning basic features of Illustrator.
Well, you're also using up that 24-hour clock real fast with that.
Yeah, they really... And the New York Times is obviously so cool with me just being like, oh, no, sorry, I just need a little bit more time to... use Illustrator badly. No.
Yeah, it's not like they have to put out a paper or anything.
No. So there were so many things that were bad about it, but what a privilege to just be picked up and just and to have the trust from an art director to say, yeah, we'll try you out for this not even for a single illustration, for a recurring gig for a couple of months. Like, it was huge.
It really is. Like, that's such a prominent place to start, you know, your actual career in.
So much of what I'm saying, I feel sounds so quaint and twee and, you know.
I think there is a certain, like, way that the internet was then, where this kind of thing it felt like more possible to do. And there's so much gatekeeping now, I feel like, around this kind of thing that it's hard to imagine it still happening. But like, it's also just, it's a remarkable thing to be able to like be in that moment and to really like say like, hey, this is something I can do just as somebody who's just graduated, and like then go on. And
it felt hugely empowering.
Yeah.
And it also started this kind of, I don't know, it's a slippery slope, but this idea of your list of clients, which I remember feeling so prized. I mean, it still is to a degree. Like, it is kind of the platform that a certain type of illustrator and designer rightly will like build themselves on. Like, oh, I've had work in the, you know, New York Times, New York, you know, whatever, New York or whatever it is. But I remember the process of being freshly graduated and being like, oh, now I can add this one. I can say that I've worked with this person. I can say that I've worked with this person. And that it was sort of a frenzy I can remember among my peers and also like, you know, my friends in that collective that we had. Like, none of us really wanted to talk about it, but it was like, it felt special to like add somebody new to that list.
Yeah.
And it felt like it would, in some ways it did bring in like new people.
That kind of name opens doors.
Yeah.
The kind of name that doesn't open doors, though, is scabies. A term I hate to return to, but do we want to talk about the scabies illustration in particular?
What a question. What a
Goodbye, new listeners.
Just
Goodbye.
You know what's fun?
Thanks for stopping by.
Is the person that we are talking about, like the baby version of me who had just graduated and moved to Edinburgh. I want to sit him down and say, in the future, I'm not going to tell you when, but in the future, you will get on a plane. You will fly to Portland, and a person that you have not met yet will invite you into his place of work, and he will sit you down, and on mic will ask you, you want to talk about the scabies illustration? And that kind of will be your career. Isn't that fun? Anyway, carry on. And then I'll apparate into it. Yeah. I will talk about the scabies illustration because here's a funny thing. I dug it up after you got in touch.
Yes.
And I wanted to find the illustration, and I did, and it's not good.
I gotta say, I think it's better than you think it is. Because it really does, like you were talking about Frank Chimero, and I feel like there's a lot of that kind of energy to that, like this stipple drawing.
Yeah.
Without thinking about what the stipples are and what they're representing, given that it is a scabies article. But, you know, I think it's nice.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I think a lot of us were drawing on similar references, and I think it was very obvious back then. But yeah, trying to massage this into talking about a skin condition is not something like that. You never like would look at like the pushpin book and be like, here's the one about psoriasis. Isn't it beautiful?
I can tell you it's not.
But what's funny about the what I didn't really realize at the time is that to contribute an illustration to someone like the New York Times is that it ends up in a very, very, very microscopic part, like being a part of history in a way that is searchable and available to people with an internet connection. And I looked it up, and it's still there. It's archived. You can find it. But I sort of forgot that to make it, I took a reference photo of myself using Photo Booth.
So a real high resolution photo for sure.
Yeah, it was. Yes, I did, not all of the pixels, at least 6, and it was a picture of me just sort of having a bit of a scratch, and I used that as, you know, basis for the illustration, which I don't think, unless I've probably got a couple of exes out there who, if confronted with this illustration, would be like, yeah, that's just, But it struck me, I had this very clarifying moment where I was looking at an archived page on the New York Times, and I thought, the paper of record paid me money, and I gave them a naked picture of myself. And they said, yes, thank you very much. That will be great. And then I took my money, and then I flew away. And now it's available. And what is that? Why is that a career? Why is that a thing a person can do?
I don't know.
It's fun, though.
I'm not going to question the gray lady's kinks, you know.
She's famously, she does not kink shame.
No.
And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
But it did strike me that's the literal version of what happened. And I don't know, that's fun. Yeah. That's fun. I don't know. I don't have kids. I don't know if it seems unlikely. I don't know if there's going to be a solid lineage, but I would have them if only for like somewhere down the family tree somewhere. My great something is like, I wonder what old, I wonder what Jez did in his day. Oh, he looked like that. Oh, Neat. That's an image of my great grandfather that I didn't really want to have.
Well, it's you know, it's the modern equivalent of having like an oil painting of a nude, except it's a silhouette of you covered in scabies.
I feel like I'm painting a picture of this. It is not remotely explicit.
No, it is not. It's very subtle, I will actually say.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's pretty much only the dots that even show kind of where that silhouette is.
Yes. Yeah. And there's no there. Yeah.
It's not complete. There's some Gestalt principles at play.
That's what I was aiming for.
Yeah.
When I was stood in front of photo booth, tapping the button and then running back into my room and posing, I was like, this is Gestalt as hell.
Let's do one with the roller coaster background.
I said that as a sketch, but they weren't into it. They weren't into it. As a side note, and I think it still exists, and this is why Tumblr was such a delightful place at one point. I had a Tumblr called Photo Booth Reference, and I literally asked illustrators to send me the photos that they took of themselves while they were trying to draw, like, you know, a hand doing a weird shape or you know, whatever it was. It was usually hands because hands are annoying, but it still exists. I think it's photoboothreference.tumblr.com, and you will find many great illustrators of that period. Just posing or like making bizarre faces, or, you know, clearly they were like, they really needed to draw a samurai, but they didn't have any samurais in their immediate vicinity, so they just did a pose in their bedroom.
Well, I mean, the local samurai, that's hard to get on short notice.
Right. That's you know, that's not on TaskRabbit.
No,
you can't. No.
Not anymore.
No,
not now that they've unionized. I support unions, just to be clear. Even samurai unions. Don't cut me, please. Anyway, I mean, still, this is a huge get. Where does this actually like take you? This like illustration job with probably the most known newspaper in the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you go from here?
I think through a combination of that and then the Destroyer post that I mentioned earlier, like that led to me getting a lot of illustration gigs that were just data visualization in general. And so that was, for a time, I was getting similar jobs that were either like more on the data side or more on the just plain illustration side.
Yes. And
that continued for a while. Like that was pretty dependable. Like I did.
That was the heyday of it.
Yeah.
Too.
Yes. And there were lots of like small publications that are now defunct or have been defunct for a long time that like had a lot of budget for big illustrated articles, and that was that was a huge boon. So I started getting a lot of that work. I also, when I graduated, I don't know if I mentioned this, I did not move to London, but I moved to Edinburgh.
Yes.
As I mentioned, I was sort of ironically at that point, I remember being terrified of London. I was half terrified, and I also had no faith in myself to be able to make rent based on my current skills. Whereas Edinburgh was cheaper, smaller. My partner at the time, funnily enough, who was the person who starred in the Baskerville Syndrome video.
Oh, really?
We were like living together up there, so it was a much easier thing to like move to Edinburgh and do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I got there, I just started freelancing. So most of my time was editorial illustration. Increasingly started getting some more illustration for advertising, and also a lot of branding and identity stuff, mostly for, I would say, local things in Scotland, which I really enjoyed. I did a ton of work for an arts organization called Arica that I really loved working with, because the stuff that they were programming was really cerebral and wild, and they were very open to really playful, like experimental, like design work. My lasting memory of that was that one of the performances they had was called, I forget the name of the artist. Damn. But the name of the performance was called Cello Powder. And
it's so much more affordable than whole cello.
just add water.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm probably going to mangle what it actually was, or sort of like the thematic like thrust of it. But it essentially was a person. What's the name of is it the NutriBullet? What's the little blender?
Oh, sure, yeah, the NutriBullet. Yeah.
So it was either a NutriBullet or similar, and this person completely pulverized an entire cello in a NutriBullet.
Oh my God.
Down to literal powder.
Wow.
And then they decanted it into little glass jars and gave it out to people as they were leaving. But while all of this was happening, the audio sort of landscape of this was, I think they had recorded every single tone or every single conceivable note that a cello can play, laid them all on top of each other, and then played them at deafeningly loud volume. Which sounds like a joke about performance art. It's like, this is a parody. I was there and watched it, and it was really striking. It was really amazing.
It sounds incredible.
I don't know. I really love that sort of mode of performance, like sort of conceptual art, just because of the idea of it is always so fascinating. But that was the kind of thing that Arica were programming, and that is indicative of how experimental they wanted to be with their branding and also with their design of their. I did some branding for a bunch of festivals that they put on, and I really loved that stuff. And there's a real one-to-one from like, I made that Destroyer poster, I started doing a lot more data visualization, and they were super into that aesthetic. So there are through lines. You only really realize them after the fact. Well,
and like being in Edinburgh, like that's a huge arts town, like a huge performance town. Like that's a great way to also like kind of get, like your fears of like, how am I going to fit into London? Like you're going to fit really naturally with that kind of stuff, like in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I have a lot of fondness for that period too. Like I was just in Edinburgh last week for the Fringe. I went to see some comedy, and if you ever get a chance to go to Edinburgh, just in general, it's a wonderful city. But during the Fringe, it is also nuts. It sort of takes over.
I can't imagine.
It takes over the entire city, and it's such a good time. But anyway, I think about that time fondly because the community there was small enough that you could really feel like a tangible part of it. So I had a studio space in like the back of, there was a print gallery that was in a space called the Grass Market, which is no longer there. And I was working in the back of like a lightless submarine in the back room, but it wasn't important because artists and illustrators were coming in. And then there was this also, God, everything's defunct.
I want to back up. You were in a submarine?
I'm being colorful.
Oh, I see.
It was submarine, like, there were no windows. Well, there was one window, but it looked directly at a brick wall. And I mean like 2 feet, and it's a wall. It was the world's least functional window. It really was not necessary.
The building plans require us to have a window somewhere, and this is where it's going to be.
I guess it's here.
Yeah.
But it was special because there was another illustrator who I was sharing space with, and it was nice to kind of grouse about the state of editorial illustration. In the Grass Market also, there was this great bookstore design space called Analog Books that everyone, like living there at the time who was in, well, I feel like, I don't know, everybody really adored. It was run by this couple who were really supportive of all kind of people coming up and like I did their new identity, like branding for their shop and yeah, I don't know. It was very easy to feel that the shape of the community was something that you could not put in your pocket, but it was, I don't know, like it was tangible.
Yeah.
In a way that I'm experiencing now in London. It's tangible, but it's so big, it's so colossal, and there's so many, and it's so diverse, and you can feel at home in your little bit, but it's a really little bit.
Yeah, there's a million bits.
Yeah,
and they're not really necessarily even connected.
And that's exciting. That's when we were talking, when you emailed me, I was thinking about things that I would call a mistake, and I would say there aren't many, which I don't mean to sound is not like hubris or anything, but I think it was, not to bring up the 1998 film, Gwyneth Paltrow film Sliding Doors one more time, but like there's a world in which I did not move to Edinburgh, in which I moved to London.
Yeah,
and maybe would have been fine, but to be sitting here in this room is a product of like a very, very weird path that I took that involves moving to Edinburgh and then getting hired at Facebook and then leaving Facebook and then going back and then meeting all of the people that I met and making weird connections and then and somehow having like, the right combination of like luck and privilege and work. And so I don't know if any of those are mistakes.
But I think that's so often the case, is like the things that are regrets or that feel like mistakes, maybe even at the time, where it's like, oh God, I missed that opportunity, or I really screwed that up. Like, they often become so formative and so key in terms of shaping who we become and like what the next step is on the path, that it like, they're not necessarily bad. Like, we just have to go through it to get to where we are now. Yeah. And that's, I think that's like, that's the real truth of this, is like, you gotta go through that, and you gotta have those like things that, you know, maybe in the moment you're just like, oh God, but like, you know, you ultimately need that to get to where you are.
Yeah. And something about design specifically is it's so broad, and there's so much potential. Yeah. And if I were to write down a list of all of the projects that I've done, it's so all over the place. It's so nuts, and it at the time felt like a high wire act. Yeah. And like, any moment this is going to break bad. This is not going to go well. And I also can't see, 5 feet in front of me, so I'm not sure if it's going to keep going or if it's just going to stop. But then when you look at it in retrospect, you're like, oh no, this actually logically makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And just based on what I took from studying graphic design, I don't know. I never had, obviously you wouldn't, but I never had any sense of like what the potential was as a career when I graduated. Never like the idea that I would have moved to the US and lived here for 12 years, and with everything that entails, like that, the very idea of that wasn't anywhere in my head. What a delight, what a privilege. Design. It's also good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes.
Absolutely.
Sometimes.
Well, yeah. It can be cruel. Yeah. I was going to say too, like, for all the things that you're doing during this time, the other thing is kind of like you're doing writing as well and web design. Do you want to talk about like some of the work that you were doing then?
Yeah. Web design, honestly, I will say, I made that Evening Tweed site.
Yes.
And also, when I was hired at Facebook in 2011, I interviewed with both the product design side and the communication design side, and both teams were hiring. And the need on product design was heavier, so that's where I ended up. But it was some of the like web design stuff that I'd done on my own portfolio site and other places that sold them on me. Yeah. I think what's hilarious is I've talked to some people at Facebook about that hire, and they were like, yeah, that wasn't a great idea. Or like there were various people at the company at that time that were like, why are we just hiring like CS graduates or like fresh out of design graduates to come and work on this? Like, let's take a gamble and maybe hire someone with more of a print background or just less of a product design background to just see how that works. And the answer is not good. But I don't know, it was worth a try. Because that's anyway, I'll come back to that. That's beside the point. So web design, I will say, it's not something, especially today, good Lord, I have no idea what I'm doing today.
It's an alien spacecraft written in a language that humans cannot comprehend. That's what that has become.
Yeah. I will say that I am still, local reference, I am still using Panic's
Coda?
I'm still using Coda.
Yeah.
That is still...
And Nova before it,
yes.
And Transmit before that.
Transmit, that little truck.
Bless you, Panic.
I have so fond memories of that little truck.
Yeah.
I wish that still represented what it was, but now, anyway, beside the point, 1,000 years old. Web design, I wouldn't say was a massive string to my bow, but the writing side of it. So one of the projects I also had in my final year at Brighton was a collection of short stories and illustrations, and I made it with same person, Lizzie, the Baskervilles sufferer. And it was her illustrations and my short stories, and it was a very twee, like cute little thing. It was like hand bound, and it was a print Gocko. Did you ever use Gocko?
Oh sure, yes.
Yeah.
My teaching partner Kate Bingham and Burt was a big print Gocko fan, and then only the Rizzo has been able to capture her heart since then.
I loved Gocko. I made so much with that thing, like literally thousands of prints on that. Like it was such a joy. But that book was, at least the cover was Gocko printed. I didn't really I wouldn't stand by any of that writing, any of those short stories. Pretty bad. But it was more just like, this is something that I know I enjoy, and I want to see if I can fold it into my practice somehow. So Lizzie and I made that book. That book was called I Am the Friction, which was based on she overheard a conversation between a couple at a restaurant, and one of them said, I am the friction.
Oh, no.
Which, yeah, in the context of that conversation, probably very bad, but as someone just like stealing bits of language from people, very good. Very good.
They
very
should
funny.
stop having David Mamet script their relationship conversations. It's a bit overwritten, I think.
Bit much for me. So yeah, we made one of those, and then when I moved to Edinburgh, we wanted to make another one with not our work in. So we commissioned a bunch of people. We reached out to people who we really loved and paired 12 writers with 12 illustrators and had writing based on illustrations and then illustrations based on writing. So like back and forth. And yeah, we sort of ran it as a small press, and we made books together. And writing in general, I don't know, even the Baskerville stuff, like the joy of that was the writing of the nonsense in it. Subsequently, I guess the biggest thing that happened writing-wise was then Dictionary Stories, the book that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Which was a collection of short stories, all written using entirely example sentences from the dictionary. So sort of like a constrained fiction. It's a very odd book. But yeah, I made that after leaving Facebook. Spent like 18 months just reading a lot of dictionaries and losing it in a good way. It was fun.
The normal trajectory of leaving Facebook and then reading a bunch of dictionaries.
Oh,
of course.
It's the classic story.
Yeah.
Everybody does it.
We've all done it.
Yeah. I remember writing my goodbye post, just like, so long, folks, I'm going to just
only
another
I had
person
another
off.
word that I could use here, but I don't have a thesaurus, so I'll get that dictionary. There we go.
What? No.
No.
I'm in it for the dictionaries. Yeah, and that was super exciting because that was it came out through Harper Perennial, and it was my first experience of going through the sort of just like traditional publishing route, albeit with a very non-traditional book.
Well, yeah, and it's like such an incredible premise that, I mean, it almost feels like it's like going back to your Edinburgh days of like thinking about like, well, what is a kind of like sideways way to look at this problem and like explore it more holistically. Like it's writing that's also contemporary art in its own way. Like
for the listeners at home, I just made a very aggrieved face.
Yes,
but
I've wounded Jez.
I'm still British.
Yeah.
Like I did live here for a while, but I'm still essentially a very British man. Who, yeah. Some would say that. Yeah. That, I mean, what makes me laugh is that the stuff that I tend to do outside of work, I think I am just forever bound to make things that are very peripheral. Like I'm never going to make a crowd pleaser in whatever it is that I'm working on. Like I think they're always going to be very obtuse and very, very odd.
But that's good. I think that's that's magical.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be nice. I was actually having a conversation with a friend in Edinburgh about this the other day. Like there's a sweet spot of your the lowest bar is that you have enough support from a people who like your stuff that it sustains, that it can keep going. And then as you creep up, you start to have to, decide where you're happy with, like, or what you're happy with. And I don't know, you always want more people to engage with the thing that you're making. But then it's also nice that the people who are engaging with it are, the real sickos, like the real dictionary sickos. But
the real twisted little perfects.
Yeah, I don't know, but then that's funny too to me because I think I will forever make peripheral things, but meanwhile, my day job, you mentioned like the Threads logo, like I don't think I will ever make anything that will be as highly visible as that is. I've been working on iconography at Instagram for the last 5 years. And like that, that's also true. Like,
yeah,
I don't think there is a thing that I will make for myself that will ever have like a iota of that sort of exposure, because is wild.
Well, yeah, because 3 billion people have seen the things that you make. Like,
yeah, you sort of have to not think about that, otherwise you don't really sleep.
Yeah. That's very fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I think it also makes sense then that, like, you know, for the things that you are making for yourself, like, they get to be more subdued experiences for people who, like, you know, just want to enjoy them.
Yeah. I think the nicest compliment I had about the Dictionary Stories book was a friend who told me that this is you. Like, only you would have made this. Which I don't, I like that. I don't know. You know, somebody else might have, but like, I think they more meant as a, like, holistically, when you read it, I think it is my sense of humor, the structure and the concept is something that like speaks to something that I like. Yeah, it's sort of, I mean, it is, sadly, it is a Horcrux. So it is, yeah, I don't know. I'm so glad it exists, and I was so lucky to be able to make it. I would like to make more, but yeah, we'll see. I don't know. And that's another thing. Like, I think when I was in Edinburgh, if you had told me that I would make a book like that and that I would end up, I don't know, it's fun and exciting what these things will lead you to that you won't have any idea of at the outset. Like, at one point I found myself, there is a very sketchy video where you basically can't understand anything I'm saying, but like, at one point I was asked to speak at Columbia University to a bunch of lexicographers.
Oh, wow.
Like, real, like, dictionary people.
Yeah.
And I've never felt both more accepted and then more like a supreme imposter. And it was a real how did I get here? You know, it was like, yeah, how fun that design did that. That's great.
But I think that's a really interesting thing to get to experience.
Oh, it definitely is. Yeah, I'm not knocking it. It's just what a strange path and a place to end up when you started just being like, well, I hope I can turn around this illustration in 24 hours, or I hope I can pay rent next month. Yeah.
2011, you start working at Facebook.
Yes.
Like, you go on to the product side.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to talk about that kind of work at all, or?
Yeah. Well, all I can say is that it wasn't the right place for me to be, and that became obvious quite quickly. What was great about it was that for a brief time, my manager was Nicholas Felton, because he had been hired, I think maybe a few months before I started.
Oh, because he got hired to do Timeline.
He did,
the rebuild of the profile pages.
Yeah, him and Ryan Case, like, they had worked together on like Datum and yeah, Nicholas was my manager at one point.
Wow.
And also, like, the day before I started, like, he and I like got a drink in Palo Alto, and like, talk about a moment where you're like, what the fuck is happening? Like, this is like, there are peanuts on the floor. What is this man is like a person that I've idolized and ripped off. Like, I'm mostly kidding. And he's wonderful, and like, and is very supportive, and is like, Jazz, that you are there, and that part of it was great, but it was also instructive to realize that kind of work was just not my, I don't know, it's just not the way my brain works. And so I did it for a year, and I will say throughout that year, I would have moments where I would bump into Ben Barry, also formerly of Facebook. He was one of the sort of earlier hires, and he also came from a print background. And his whole thing at Facebook was that there were big warehouse spaces that the company had, and he just sort of found a corner and gathered a bunch of screen printing materials and any sort of like hand process that he could find, and he started making internal posters and all this sort of stuff.
Oh, sure, yes.
So the Analog Research Lab was what it was called, and it is also now defunct, sadly.
No.
And so after the first year at Facebook, that's where I went, because it was so obvious. I mean, it was what a lucky, amazing place to end up. You are at one of the biggest tech companies that you can point to, but which at that point probably still has, I don't know. I think when I joined in 2011, they'd maybe had like 3,000 employees.
Wow.
They now have more.
Yeah, I would imagine.
They've got a few more at this point. I mean, it's in the tens and tens of thousands. But in that moment, they were moving to this new campus in Menlo Park, and the analog lab was going to have a big open garage door space, and they had screen printing, and they had letterpress and a giant, like, terrifying guillotine, and just all of these resources. And that's where I was for the bulk of my time that I was at Facebook, was in that room. And like, so lucky, you know, I would get on those like buses, you know, you would do that whole rigmarole, but then you would peel away from all of the like engineers and like legal people and people with real jobs, and you'd be like, I'm going to put on an apron and get covered in screen print ink and do that sort of stuff. Yeah, it was great. I again, so many fond memories of sticking around late at night because people would go home, and I would just like, you know, ride a bike around campus and like screen print or use the risograph or just like make work, both for my day job, but more often than not, I would make like personal stuff. And yeah, so that job should not have existed. And I'm so lucky that it did. And then the analog lab went through some changes, and then, yeah, it makes sense at a company of that scale. It does not make sense at a company of the scale that Meta is today.
Yeah.
It's like a bit too twee, a bit too quaint. It was at that point to a degree, but I don't know, it had like really good people and a like good heart at the center of it, and like a good intent.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, thinking about 2011, like, I mean, Facebook had just let non-college students on like maybe 2 or 3 years earlier. I want to say that was maybe 2008. So like, this is a very young company that probably doesn't really know who they are or where they want to be. Yeah. Like, it makes sense to be experimenting and trying, like, well, what's a weird thing that we can do? I don't know, have a screen printing facility.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, and invest in it too.
Yeah.
You know, we ran classes, we taught people how to screen print. We, you know, taught people, they were artists in residence. That was one of the best parts, was the artist in residency program, because they would come in, they would be there for a couple of months-ish, and they would work out of the studio with us. And so you had amazing people coming through and just watching their practice, and they used all of the resources there and kind of worked together with us. But it's just, you know, when I was first emailed about it, again, thought it was a prank, came over for an interview, very surreal. And when I looked around at my peers at that point who had graduated, like the kind of work they were making, like people weren't really getting that sort of opportunity. Like we will fly you to the West Coast, and you can set up shop there and exist there and work at a company of this scale. And I think at the time I was just like, why not? Like, if it's good, it's good, and if it's not, then you come home. It's fine. Yeah. And then year over year, it just kept being pretty good. There are, you know, there's stuff about that period that that don't feel great. But I don't know, I sort of have to look at it in terms of this like big tapestry of like stuff that I've done. Yeah. And try and weave it in and be mindful of it. Yeah, it's an odd thing. And now I'm back there and have been for a while.
Well, I was going to say, so you leave, you write dictionary stories. Yeah. And then there's some time in between, and then you come back to Meta. I guess it's still Facebook at that stage, but do you come back onto Instagram specifically?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yeah. So I had a friend on the then sort of burgeoning design systems team, which was 2 or 3 people at that point, I think, maybe, who said, I hate drawing icons. You love drawing icons. Please come and draw icons for us 3 days a week. And I think that was perfect. You know, I was 3 days a week contracting for them. You know, I would catch like, I don't know if I would catch the F market. I would get on this like rickety, like Richard Scarry ass like public transport thing.
There's a pig in a uniform who's, you know, piloting it, of course.
It was the tweeest way to get to work. And I was like, what is this? What is my life? What is happening? What is this? And yeah, and I've been on that team ever since. Like, it's been 5 years basically, just working on iconography. And mostly, we've had some contractors here and there, but I've mostly been doing it myself, which is very odd. And again, just want to tap that person on the shoulder who graduated and was like, this is what you are responsible for now. looking at Instagram back as it was in 2011, where people were still sort of legitimately just posting pictures of food. And no one was showing design work at that point.
No.
Like the idea of posting a non-photo to Instagram in like 2009 or whatever it was, like that, it seemed...
Oh, is verboten.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even consider it, because like I think there was a real sense of like, this is a platform that is just for fun times, and you must put a filter on it, and then like there were no marketing arms of anything, I feel like, using it.
Yeah, and I think there was also a sense of to self-promote in that way on that platform felt sort of gaudy, or felt sort of, I don't know what the word is. I don't know. There just was there was a feeling that it was like, oh no, that's not what this is for.
Well, and it felt like it didn't have the tools. Like with Facebook, you're promoting an event, and there's a whole events management system, and there's pages, and like Instagram just being so flat, it felt like, this really is just you are yourself, and you're posting your meal and a sunset, and it's good.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love that?
Yeah. So to look at the current state of it, and to look at a designer's Instagram, and it's just a wall. It's just a wall of work. It is just where your portfolio lives now.
Yeah.
Kind of. Funny enough, I forget where I got someone. Wait, I think I listened to Mallory's episode.
Oh yes.
And at the end of Mallory's episode,
Wilson,
she said she was like, "Oh, this is kind of old school, but this is my Instagram." I was like, "What?" I mean, I get it, I agree, but also the fact that it was described as old school, it's like, oh yeah, oh god, I'm a pile of dust. Like, I'm just sweep me up. I'm so far past relevance.
I'll get the strong rats in here. They have 5 of them together can move a dustpan. But it's also like, I mean, as lovely as those days on Instagram were, that was never going to be sustainable. Just like the heyday of Tumblr, like as beautiful an object as that Tumblr was, like it became today's Tumblr, which is weird.
Question mark? Yeah.
Full of auto-playing ads that are the full page for free-to-play mobile games where you're just shooting things and it adds guys. I don't understand what those are, but it only shows me that, and they're so distracting.
I haven't looked at Tumblr in a while. I think my old Tumblr is still there, and I like looking through it because it's it captures the time pretty well. But as to what Tumblr is or wants to be these days, I don't know.
I mean, it's better than what became of LiveJournal. I looked up my old LiveJournal recently, and wow. The entire homepage is in Cyrillic.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a whole different vibe now.
That's an approach. Yeah.
Believe it might be owned by the Russian state, possibly.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Huh.
That's fun.
Did I get rid of my? I think I got rid of my live channel. Rutrow.
Yeah. I don't think the email address that's associated with mine goes anywhere anymore. So
what was that email address?
I don't know, because I think it may have been pre-Gmail for me. So I think it may have been a Yahoo email address.
I had a Hotmail.
Or it was my College of Southern Nevada Community College email address, which really doesn't go anywhere anymore. I was just running off a server in somebody's basement, I think.
Here you go. You want a mistake? This is a mistake.
Please.
One of those earliest emails I remember was child of the monkey basket at yahoo.com, which was
child of the monkey basket.
First of all, a real picture of a certain era of internet.
Oh, 100%
humor, but was actually a specific reference to the Supergrass fan club, which was called Children of the Monkey Basket.
I've got a million questions now.
Oh, none of them will have answers that are
can answer.
Interesting in the slightest. But there's a mistake.
Well, I mean, that's so interesting though.
Is it?
I think so. I'm trying to remember, because the one that I really remember is my AOL username, because I was posting I was an internet cartoonist at age 8 on AOL's Blackberry Creek, and I posted Abby Cat comics. Were definitely not ripoffs of Garfield. Definitely not, even though the cat was orange, which the real Abby Cat was not. But I believe my username was the super cool username Mr. Mac 630, because I was such a Mac fanatic, and I loved my Performa 630, a cheap ass Mac that probably was no good.
But I like that it's formal. You know?
Yeah.
It's Mr. Mac.
It's Mr. Mac.
Yeah.
You know,
have some respect.
Exactly.
Put some respect
on that name.
On Mr.
The
Mac.
name being Mr. Mac 630.
You know,
I couldn't get Mr. Mac. No.
You know those like big fancy monograph books that you get for sort of like, you know, vaunted designers, and they're beautiful, and the production design is great, and their earliest work is like, there's some sketchy stuff back then, but you can kind of see like a really nice through line. You're like, oh, I see why this person is who they are.
Yeah.
And then, not that I ever think that would happen for you, because I don't think that I'm the kind of designer that would ever happen for, but like,
it's more likely you than me.
Well, who knows? But like, I imagine like that sort of monograph, but with sort of the bullshit that we have just been discussing, like in the very front of the book, just like a stain. Like here is his scabies era. It's like a blue era, but it's so much worse.
Damn it! Now it's going to be so hard for me not to title this episode "Scabies Era,"
Please don't title it Scabies Era.
That's going to not attract any listeners at all to this episode. Instant delete is what they will do to that. Take podcast player, throw it in the trash.
You never want an episode title that just makes you feel itchy.
Yeah,
that's not.
It's a call to action, but to do the wrong thing, I'll say.
To buy some Benadryl.
Yeah. So you're back at Instagram. You're designing icons that are seen around the world, and then you are again very notable for having designed the Threads logo. Mm-hmm. And you posted on to your Threads account like some of the iterations. Like you went through 40 really different versions of that before you landed on that. Like,
oh, I mean that was just sort of the ones that I shared in that little reel that I posted. But there were a lot. There were hundreds and hundreds, honestly. And I don't know. That whole process was so fun. That project was a total delight. And also terrifying and occasionally very like galling one, but it was delightful. And there were maybe the original design team was really just three of us, like a couple of folks from the brand design team, and then I was brought in to just like really focus on the mark. But it was super agile. Like it moved really, really quickly because Threads was moving really, really quickly. And how often do you get to work on a mark that is, you know, it's still very much in its infancy. It's only like barely a year old, but it's the first experience I've had with seeing a mark that I've made blown up to that sort of scale. In I don't know, I've seen it in some pretty insane places. I feel very naive when I say that.
Well,
to me,
but it's also incredibly flattering. Like I think on your Threads, I was also seeing like people who'd done like illustrations using the Threads, and like that's such a special thing. Is like
that is incredible
to actually love a thing enough to like actually turn it into something else. Like
that level of sort of cultural, I don't know what you would call it, but when it is completely removed from that whole process of design that we went through, and it just becomes, you know, sort of neutral and something that people can play with in the same way that, you know, the Twitter bird at one point became like, if you were going to do an editorial illustration about Twitter like that, you would see that bird like, I don't know, holding a sword or being impaled by a sword or not, other things that weren't sword based. I don't know why those are what I come up with first, but it becomes a part of the landscape that you've contributed to. That is, I mean, that's wild. What an opportunity. It's so fun. But yeah, there was so much that got thrown aside, and so many sort of explorations that we did that really went nowhere, but very exciting.
Well, it's also a fascinating thing to think back. Like at the beginning of your story, you were talking about, you know, going through early like foundations year and like having to do all those iterations on that like copy that you've been given. Yeah. And like to the students who like have that version of the assignment or the draw a letter 100 ways version of the assignment, like you wonder why do that? Yeah, because that's what real design practice is. Yeah,
like there are so many darlings to kill, and get used to it. It's because it's one of the skills that I find myself having to rely on most. Yeah, and just getting more flexible and less precious, which I would say that is the biggest challenge for me because I tend to be quite sort of perfectionist with that stuff. But Yeah, there is. Yeah, that's nice. I'd never really thought of that through line before, but I'm definitely thankful for going through all of those exercises. Now, at the time, no, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. What a waste of time. Jez, this has been such a delight. It's been so good having you here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been really, really fun.
If people want to find more about your work, I mean, I guess other than just downloading Instagram and Threads and looking at it there,
right?
Where can they go?
I am Jez Burrows on most things, presumably Instagram and Threads, and then jezburrows.com. Although there hasn't been a portfolio there for a long time, but that is usually where I'm sharing stuff.
But you also have a relatively new book and introducing.
Yeah.
Do you still have copies of that available to purchase?
Just picture me opening my closet door to like a pile of cardboard boxes underneath my jackets. Sean, I sure do. What's it going to take to get you into a nice book today?
Yeah, listeners, the photos make that look really, really gorgeous, and I want the listeners of this show to help clean out Jez's closet, give those books a good home, because it's a really cool. Do you want to talk about what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is I guess I would usually describe it as an artist book just because it's more about the form a little bit. But essentially, I saw the movie The Rock, and there was a credit in the credit sequence for a character who was just referred to as Marine that dies.
Finally, my big break. Exactly. I'm playing a Marine.
Exactly.
Oh, wait. Oh, God.
Wait, he what? What? Oh. And I wrote that down in a note immediately and thought, that's something. I don't know what that is, but that's something. And then subsequently, every time I went to the movie, I would stay for the credit sequence and see if there was anything that made me laugh or that was interesting. And then I kept going until I had 3,000 of them.
Wow.
And then as you do that, you kind of start to notice patterns and put them into various categories. And then the final book is designed just like a credit sequence, but with all of these names and their actors, listed out. And yeah, it's I'm a insufferable movie person, so I was really invested into it. But it's also, I don't know, it's also about language, which inevitably is the stuff that I make that I like the most. So yeah, that's what it is.
That sounds really incredible. Thank you so much, Jez.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you're in town for XOXO, but I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by this studio and meet all our rat overlords.
My pleasure.
Also, hey, thank you to anybody out there who's listening to this. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already, and tell anyone you know and everyone you know about the show. Don't tell people you don't know about the show. They'll think you're weird. Although the people who know you will also probably think you're weird as well. Now, if there's somewhere else that you'd maybe rather hear the show than where you're hearing it right now, why not visit dididothat.design, our website, and check out all the options. That's also where you can find some images that go along with each and every episode. We got a whole bunch more of season 5 coming out right after this, a whole incredible lineup. So stick around because we got way more of this. This has been Did I Do That? I'm Sean Schumacher, and as we always say at the close of every episode,
well, I mean, so here's the funny thing is good night, everybody.
That's what we always say. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Oh, boy.
Oh, my God.
Unusable.
The rutabaga stuff.
The rutabaga, yes.
Yes.
Great safe word, by the way.
Thank you. It's never come up in regular conversation, other than us speculating about what a rutabaga is, because no one seems to know.
See, I knew because when I moved here from the UK, I wanted Swede, which is what it's referred to as in the UK.
Really?
Yeah, it's spelled like suede. Or is it? No, it's SWEDE. But anyway, I was looking for Swede, and all I found was a very suspiciously similar looking vegetable called rutabaga. I was like, this is a prank. That's not a real word. Someone knew I was coming and was like, let's name this the most absurd name possible and see if he buys it. And
this is a word that is in a Bugs Bunny cartoon as a place that he's trying to get to. Rancho Cucamonga and then Rutabaga.